Okay? Now, some of you are going, what is that? All right? So I'm going to tell, especially my age, and they still make these. But now, these are road maps. And when we used to use these on a regular basis, this was state-of-the-art navigation, okay? All right? And what I remember is when we used one of these, I remember how we used it. And if you think about it, in this era, when this was taking place, you couldn't go into a gas station. You couldn't go into a store without seeing a rack that was full of road maps. They would usually be at the counter by the cash register or by the door. And typically what you would see is you would see these road maps of the surrounding states that you were close to. And guess what else? If you were like us and you opened up your glove box, what was usually in the glove box? Road maps, right? All right. I mean, you could find 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. I mean, and here's the thing. Now, I will tell you this. There is a learned art. It's not taught, it's learned as far as how to fold these back up like they came out of the pack, right? Okay? All right, so we all know that. And then when we use this, what we would typically do is we would take this out the night before, the day before, and we would stretch it on the bar, we'd stretch it on the counter, and we would map out the destination to where we were going. And then we'd pack the car, and then the next thing you know, we're off the next morning, and we're on our journey. And it never fails. And you'll remember, it never fails. At some point in the journey, your passenger does what? Takes the road map out and unfolds it in the passenger seat just to make sure that you're headed in the direction that you're supposed to be going, right? And then if it got really bad, you know what we did? We pulled off the side of the road, or either we found a station, and then we took this map, and we would get outside, and we would put it on our hood or on the back of the car, and we would sit there, and we would scratch our head trying to figure out. Now, this usually took place, and it usually happened when we came into maybe a detour or some road construction. And here's the thing. This didn't tell us ahead of time if there was going to be a road, a detour, did it? You didn't know until you actually got there. But this got us to where we needed to go. And now we use what we call Global Positioning System, GPS. Now, this Global Positioning System, GPS, that uses satellite technology actually came about in 1990. And we still use this modern advancement today. Now, here's the thing about GPS. You don't question GPS, okay? You don't correct GPS. Basically, what you do is you get in your car minutes before your journey and you type in a what? An address. And guess what? There it is, right? And we just do exactly what GPS says. In 500 feet, you'll take a right. In 1,000 feet, you'll veer slight left. Or 1.2 miles, you'll stay in the left 2 lanes, okay? And you got to love this one. When possible, what? Make a U-turn, right? I mean, come on. And then if you really get bad, it's they have to recalculate. Route unknown is what GPS says. Now, we used both of these to get us to a particular destination. And both of these work. But with both of these, we can also sometimes be and get lost. Okay, so the point is, whether you used a paper map or you used the modern technology, you can still get lost using both of them. And if you haven't, you just haven't been traveling long enough. Just keep driving. I promise you, you will be lost at some point in time. Now, usually when we talk about being lost, we're talking about in a physical location or a particular place maybe that's unknown to us. Do you know that you can be lost in a familiar place? And I'm not talking about location or a position. What if there was a way that you could be lost that's not physical? Have you ever thought about that? Do you know that you can be lost when it comes to God? Here's the question. Is it possible to be lost in our relationship with God and not even know that we're lost? We're going to look at some scripture today. We're going to look at a parable that you guys have been reading since you were kids. When Jesus spoke and when he taught the crowds and the people, he typically used a lot of parables, and he often spoke in those. Now, a parable is simply a story used to illustrate something important about God and what it means to follow him. And in the book of Luke, Luke uses many of Jesus' parables throughout his entire book, including the one that we will be in today, which features sheep. It features sheep. Now, I'm going to give you some fun facts about sheep, okay? Sheep are mentioned in the Bible more than 500 times, more than any other animal, okay? All right? And now, if you think about it, and really think about it, the sheep does not have a very good image, do they? I mean, if I were to ask you, if I were to poll 10 of you, hey, what's your favorite animal? I doubt very seriously that any one of you is going to tell me, oh, my favorite animal is a sheep. It's probably not going to happen, is it? Okay? So when we think about sheep, we usually think about it in a negative way. Another fun fact about sheep is they're the dumbest of all animals. The dumbest of all animals. Now, for the most part, our view of sheep is a negative view. For example, we don't say positive things like, oh, Ronnie's as strong as a sheep. And we don't say things like Jim is as wise as a sheep. Okay? And we certainly don't say things like, David, you're as brave as a sheep, man. I mean, you're as brave as a sheep. Those are things that we don't say. Okay? Now, what we do say sometimes is that you're as silly as a sheep, or, to be better put, you're as dumb as a sheep. Okay? All right? I mean, if you want to get right down to it. And what we might do is we might criticize others for being led into doing something foolish or dangerous or wrong by saying that they have behaved like a sheep. Now, I'm going to give you, this is not a fun fact, this is just a fact, okay? If someone comes to you and they tells you that you are behaving or you have behaved like a sheep, that is not a compliment, okay? It's not a compliment. But now, even with all of their shortcomings, guess what? Sheep, they're still very important and they're valuable animals. They were one of the first domesticated animals, and they've been important to mankind for centuries. They provide wool. The wool is made into clothing. Now, this is a renewable resource. Let me tell you how. It's because the sheep, after you shear them, they will obligingly grow you another coat for next year so you can shear it again. a renewable resource. They also provide milk. Now, milk, you can use it and you can turn it into yogurt. You can turn it into butter. You can turn it into cheese, which is another renewable resource. And then, of course, and ultimately for the sheep anyway, they can provide meat, okay? Now, if a sheep provides meat, that's the ultimate sacrifice that he's going to make. But here's the thing. They provide a renewable resource as far as food and clothing. Sheep can make use of a much sparser pasture or terrain than cattle can, and are able to cope with the rough ground because they're somewhat agile climbers. So therefore, they were the suited animal in Jesus' time. And since most of the clothing was made from wool, they had a very important source of wealth. They became a very important source of wealth. So to sum all of that up, here's the thing. Sheep are valuable, but rather dumb animals. Okay? Sheep are valuable, but rather dumb animals. A sheep, once it has strayed away, is a creature that is remarkably heedless. It goes wandering on and on without any power or inclination to return back, even if it's in danger. It has no inclination to run and get away. In other words, sheep are not very good at looking after themselves. They're not able to defend themselves, and they haven't the sense to go back to safety. But because sheep are valuable animals, they have shepherds to look after them. Now, in Jesus' time, the shepherd would have done a number of things. The first thing that he would have done was he would have led the sheep to fresh pastures. He would have also led the sheep to waters, still waters, if you will, to ensure that they had enough to eat and enough to drink. He would have kept the flock together so that none got lost or trapped. And he would have watched over them and ran off any predator or animal that might want to come and cause them harm. So without further ado, if you'll turn to Luke chapter 15. Luke 15 will be in the first 7 verses. Luke 15, first 7 verses. Now, as you're turning there, and before we dig into that, let me give you a little bit of background here. The Pharisees had been trying to trick Jesus. For some time, they'd been trying to do this. They didn't like him casting out demons. They didn't like him healing the sick. And they even accused him of doing it in the name of Satan, if you'll remember. Now, the crowds were following and listening to Jesus, and the Pharisees really couldn't stand that because they weren't getting the attention. So Luke 15, 1 through 7. Luke 15, 1 through 7. It says, "Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near Jesus to listen to him. And both the Pharisees and the scribes began to complain, saying, 'This man receives sinners and eats with them.' And so he told them this parable, saying this, 'What man among you, if he has 100 sheep and has lost one of them, does not leave the other 99 in open pasture and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he puts it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends, his neighbors, and he's saying to them, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my sheep that was lost." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who have no need of repentance. Now, think about it. Jesus is walking, he's talking, and he's teaching the crowds. And he's hanging out with the tax collectors. He's hanging out with the sinners. And these puffed up Pharisees began to grumble and they began to complain as to cause a disturbance or maybe a division. And look what Jesus did. What did he do? He stopped. He stopped, and right there in the middle of all of those people, he told a love story about a little lost lamb, a little lost sheep. Now, in the first two verses, you can see that Jesus uses the parable because the scribes and the Pharisees began to what? They began to grumble about whom Jesus was talking to. They began to complain about who Jesus was hanging out with. The Pharisees, however, sadly never recognized that they're lost and that their hearts were full of wrong motives. You know, it's sad, but we still have that today. We may not have actual Pharisees, but believe it or not, we have people that come and sit in church seats. We have people that come and serve. We have people that come and do all types of things in the name of Jesus, so to say, but they do it for the wrong reasons. They do it and they have different motives than what Jesus had. They're more concerned with the approval of man than they are concerned with the approval of God. We may not actually have Pharisees here, but we do have people that grumble and complain. And it's all over all of our churches in this whole county. And it's because we're sinners. That's why. Now, some of you may be asking, why did they have a problem with who he was talking to and who he was hanging out with to begin with? I mean, who cares if he's hanging out with sinners? Who cares if he's hanging out with tax collectors, right? All right, well, here's this. If you'll recall, the Pharisees went to great lengths. And when I say great lengths, they went to great lengths to try and not break the laws. Matter of fact, they made up more laws, over 600 of them, just so that they wouldn't break the laws on an accident. So they made up even more just to help them not to break it, not even just intentional, but even if they did it on an accident. So they were very serious. They kept their traditional washings and cleansing practices as well as not touching unclean people. And if you'll also remember in chapter 11, Jesus was invited to dinner by a Pharisee. And when he gets there, what does he do? Do y'all remember? He sits down to eat, right? Okay, all right. So, but then what happened was the Pharisee got to looking at that, and he's like, well, now he didn't go through any of the washing ritual. He didn't go through any of that. He goes down just to eat, and it offends the Pharisees. In the Pharisees' mind, what they're thinking is this: well, if I don't hang out with these types of people, if I don't walk and talk with these types of people, I'll have a better chance of not touching these unclean people. Because remember, if that took place, they'd have to go through their whole washing and that cleansing ritual again. So that's why they were acting the way that they were. If they didn't hang out with them, they stood a better chance of not coming in contact with them. Now in verse 4, he asked this. He asked, what man that had 100 sheep and lost one wouldn't go out and search until he found it? Okay? What man, if you had 100 sheep and lost one of them, wouldn't go out and search until he found it? Now, in Jesus' day, I can go ahead and tell you the answer to that would be 0, okay? None. Every one of them would have went and tried to find it. Remember when I told you that the sheep were very valuable resources? They gave food, they gave milk, they gave wool. So having sheep was like having money, okay? So they were valuable. Everyone would have searched for the lost sheep. We don't really think about it that way now, do we? I mean, think about it. If you have 100 sheep and you lost one, we're talking, it's 1%, right? Oh, well. I lost one. I could have lost 5, or I could have lost 10, but I only lost one. So, that's really not a big deal. It's a big deal to them, and it still should be a big deal to us. And if you think about it, our whole lives are based off an acceptable percentage of failure. Here's what I mean by that. We start every single school year knowing that there will be a certain dropout rate. Why? Because not everyone will graduate. Every single marriage, they already can predict a divorce rate. Why? Because not everyone will stay married. And if we, talking about our unemployment, if our unemployment can just stay below 5%, we're happy with that. We don't expect everyone to be able to have or to keep a job, right? We have an acceptable percentage of failure that we think about. As far as we were concerned, or as far as we're concerned, losing only one sheep out of 100 isn't bad. Matter of fact, that's actually pretty good, we would say. But that's not the mindset in Jesus' day. Sheep were a big part of their lives and a big part of their economy. Sheep were important. Now, do you know also in the Bible that God calls us sheep? Do you know you and I, God calls us sheep? John 10, 11, 15 says this. It says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and he's not concerned about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me. Even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for my sheep. God calls us sheep. And just like sheep, they wander. The sheep wander away because they basically don't realize the benefits of staying with the shepherd and being looked after. Remember, I told you earlier that they have no sense to know when they're in danger or what they need. They're just lollygagging on out there. There's always a bit of grass somewhere else that looks greener than the grass in the pasture that the shepherd has taken them to. It sounds like us, doesn't it? If I just had that job, if I could just drive that car, if I lived in that house, and you can fill in the blank. Ever wonder why God calls us sheep? Because we can be just as foolish. We can stray easily, and we cannot be left to ourselves. We can't be left to ourselves. And just like sheep, we wander away because we too think that we know better than God what is good for us. And because we think that way, we stray. And just as real sheep we stray and we choose to live a sinful life according to the world's pleasures. When we do that, we stray. We have strayed away from the shepherd Jesus. And straying, we can be, it can be looked several different ways. We can stray by pushing a snooze button in the morning when you know God has told you to get up and read His Word. We can be straying when you skip church to do something else. We can be straying in a number of different ways. Ever wonder what happens to us when we stray from God? What predators that we might face? This big old world has lots and lots of temptation out there. And without God's help, and without the guidance, and without the support of our fellow Christians, the body, we become easy prey. And all those little temptations which we struggle with on a daily basis, the selfishness, the willingness to think worst of others, the readiness to speak worst of others, the little lies or the exaggerations that we get tangled up in, that's designed to make us look good and someone else look bad. The envy, the greed, the spite, all of these will overwhelm and devour you just like a wolf would devour a sheep. This happens when we stray. Remember the GPS, the global system, or the global positioning system that I talked about earlier, and how we just follow it without hesitation, without even thinking about it. Turn right, okay, boom. Turn left, boom. Guess what? How many times have we followed someone to a place where we got lost? Hey, let's do this. Hey, what if we go do that? Try this. Try that. What we did was we followed without hesitation. We joined in the gossip. We started to complain until pretty soon everything that we say or do is negative, or at least it produces a negative outcome. We become the glass is half empty kind of folks. And the half that it's full with, guess what? We want something else in there. We don't even like what it's half full of. That's what we become when we stray. And we don't have a shepherd to look out for us. Here's another question. How many of us have led someone to do those things? Now, you may sit here and think and say, oh, I've never led anybody or told anybody to do anything like that. Here's a question for you that I'll answer it. Does the example of how you are living your life lead in a godly way or the way of the world? I'll say that again. Does the example of how we are living our life lead in a godly way or the way of the world? In other words, do our actions and words point to Jesus? And notice I said both. You can't have one without having the other. I think one of the worst things that we could possibly do if we call ourselves Christians is to give God what I call lip service. You say one thing, but you do something else. That's one of the worst things that we could do is give God lip service. Sheep need a shepherd to look after them. We need a shepherd to look after us. Talking about sheep, have you ever seen on your drives, and we live in a rural area, so have you ever seen on your drives posted, beware of sheep on a gate? or a fence. No one's ever seen that, right? If so, I want you to take a picture of it because I need to see it, okay? So we don't see a sign that says beware of sheep posted on someone's gate. How many of you have ever seen someone or another animal fleeing for their life because of a wee little lamb chasing them? Not happening, right? Okay? Never. And the reason why is because sheep aren't dangerous. Remember, I told you they were virtually defenseless. All they can do is freeze in their tracks or maybe at best run if they come into danger. Without claws, without sharp teeth, without speed, or maybe a resounding roar to run off the predators, they become easy peasy prey. They can't scamper up a tree. They can't camouflage their cover. Sheep can't even swim, guys. And when they sense danger, what happens is they panic. Sheep need a shepherd. Sheep need a shepherd. Sheep can't get up on their own either. Now, if they fall down, this is what we call cast down. They must have a shepherd to lift them up or they'll die. Now, a cast down sheep is a sheep that has basically laid down, and because the gravity is off, and it could be for a couple of different reasons. It could be because the fleece, the wool is full and they can't get up, or it could be because they are pregnant. But if they don't get up, what's going to take place is as they lay there, the gases are going to start forming in their abdomen. And if they're not rescued, they could die within a few hours. Now, a cast down sheep is a pretty pathetic sight. They're laying there on their back, their feet's in the air, and they're flailing back and forth trying to get up, and it doesn't happen. And when a shepherd comes by and sees this cast down sheep, you know what he does? He swiftly moves into action. He picks that sheep up. And if this sheep is cast down because it's full of wool or the wool is too full, he takes him and he shears this sheep. Now, this is work on both parties here, more work on the shepherd. But I will tell you this, the sheep typically do not like to be sheared. And it's a lot of hard work, especially in this day and time, to shear a sheep. But when it was all said and done, what takes place is you see a sheep that is free of that heavy coat, that heavy wool. And you have a shepherd that is relieved because they no longer have to worry about that sheep being cast down and dying. Talking about the wool, if you'll think about it for a minute, a sheep's wool can be full of all kind of things. Nasty, dirty things. Mud, manure, sticks, ticks, any kind of bug, spurs. How many, think about it this way. How many of you guys have ever walked through a little patch of sand spurs? And they get on your britches leg. It's like you're picking for days, right? And it's only like maybe 10. Well, now you think about this for a minute. You put on you a nice, fluffy, wool jacket and run through a sand spur patch. And just waller in it. Walk through it a little bit. Walk on your hands and knees. And think about what's going to be in and on that jacket. Well, these sheep were out there every day in that type of element. So it could be bad. We are the sheep. And without Jesus, we too are defenseless. Without Jesus, we panic. Without Jesus, we can't get up. Without Jesus, we're cast down. Without Jesus, we are easily led astray. But with Jesus, He is the good shepherd, and He will take care of His sheep. we're the sheep and we wonder. Why do we wonder so often? But when we do, just like the shepherd here, we are also valuable and important in God's eyes. He doesn't just let us wander off to take our chances, nor does He just wait for us to return, because that could be never, or it could be a very long time. He goes out and He looks for us. When sheep get lost, they have no instincts to find their way home. Now, other animals have this, but sheep do not have this instinct. A shepherd's motive is not in anger to punish, but in love to rescue. The shepherd doesn't go after the sheep in an effort to punish them for going astray. His motive is to find the sheep, to restore it to its proper place in the fold. Well, guess what? So it is with God. God is the same way. He doesn't go after the lost ones so that He can punish them for their sins. He pursues them in order that He might prove His love for them and that they might be restored to a right relationship with Him. That's why He does that. Verses 5 and 6. If you look at this is what He says. He says, then He places us on His shoulders rejoicing. Does that sound like someone that's fixing to get on to you? He places us on His shoulders rejoicing. This is literally a heavenly party. And He doesn't rejoice alone. Who does He call? He calls His neighbors. He calls His friends. This shepherd doesn't stop with just a mere touch. He reaches down and He lifts the sheep up out of the place where he finds him. He removes it from the place of danger. The Good Shepherd does the same for those that He finds wandering in the dark hills of sin, if you will. He comes alongside of us. He reaches out, and when we respond to His touch, He lifts them out of our sin, and He removes us from the danger that we were in. With God, every sheep counts. With God, nothing is lost. You know, as a shepherd, even here as a real shepherd, they knew the sheep. They spent every day out there with the sheep. They knew what this particular sheep was going to do. They probably even had them named. But you know what else? The sheep knew the voice. They knew the sound of their shepherd. And when they heard that voice, they knew that they were His. And they responded. I think we're called sheep because that's the way that God made us. Just like the sheep need a shepherd, we're made to need God just that much. We can't be left to ourselves. We go astray and we get lost. To the shepherd, all the sheep are important and valuable. The ones that are safe in the fold and the ones that have wandered off. The shepherd doesn't value the ones in the fold any more than they value the ones that is lost, and vice versa. He cares for all the sheep. As the praise band comes, some of us may be here this morning and we're wondering. We've wandered off. And our fleece is full of stuff that's not God honoring, that's not pleasing to God. You can come and get rid of that today. All you have to do is ask. Come and give it to the Good Shepherd. Some of us, you may have never been in the fold, but you sense something today that you've not sensed before. And that's God telling you. That's God calling you. He's letting you know that He wants to do something in and through you. He wants you to be a part of the fold. He's reaching out. It's up to you whether you respond to His touch. And if you respond to His touch, He will lift you up and He will restore you and put you in the fold. There may be some of us here that are we're just like we do the GPS. We mindlessly follow turn after turn and thing after thing of this world. We say we love God. We say we're a Christian. But our actions and words are different. Today is the day that all of that can change. If that's you, I encourage you to come and get on your knee and ask God, the Good Shepherd, to help you, to save you, to guide you, to take care of you. We're sheep, and we need a shepherd. As we stand.